floor. When you're dragging ass out of bed, the hairs must up on your head. You picture the 20th Maine, and you're happy once again. Fight the battle against being slow with Little Ground Top Row.
This special episode of Addressing Gettysburg is brought to you by our first coffee brand, Little Ground Top,
trademark,
roasted to perfection by our friends over at Bantam Roasters. Take the high ground every morning with a piping hot cup of Addressing Gettysburg's Little Ground Top,
trademark,
that features notes of cacao, wildflowers, and toasted sugar. I even taste a hint of black pepper in mine. I look forward to my cup of Addressing Gettysburg's Little Ground Top,
trademark,
every morning, and you will too. So grab your multiple bags today at addressinggettysburg.com/cafe or drop into Bantam Roasters at 82 Steinware Avenue, across from the Dobbin House, during your next visit to Gettysburg. And hey, now that Little Round Top is open, imagine enjoying a thermos of Little Ground Top
trademark,
while checking out the view from the hill. Outstanding. That's addressinggettysburg.com/cafe or drop into Bantam Roasters at 82 Steinware Avenue during your next visit to Gettysburg.
You're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
On the first day of July, 1863, they arrived shrouded in a foreboding mist. The Confederate Infantry Division of Major General Henry Heth from A.P. Hill's 3rd Corps advanced towards Gettysburg under a veil of uncertainty. While crossing a bridge over Marsh Creek, the head of Heth's column was halted by the familiar pop of enemy small arms some 700 yards away. It was a shot from a carbine fired by Lieutenant Marcellus Jones of the 8th Illinois Cavalry. The ball had begun. The Battle of Gettysburg was underway. The soldiers in gray, anticipating militia, were met with the unexpected presence of Union cavalry. This surprise, however, did not deter them. Instead, it spurred them into a cautious advance, moving from column into skirmish lines in the fields north and south of the Chambersburg Pike. John Buford, the Union cavalry commander, was tactically maneuvering to buy time. Time that the Union left-wing commander, John Reynolds, needed to rush his infantry up to Gettysburg. Buford had gathered intelligence that Confederate units were coming in from the north and west. Armed with this crucial information, Buford strategically positioned his men to cover every major road coming in from the west, north, and east of Gettysburg. The shots fired indicated that the first Confederates were approaching from the west, a testament to Buford's strategic foresight. The Confederates, seemingly undeterred by the presence of Union cavalry, began a slow and methodical advance. Like a gray bank of storm clouds, they pushed back Buford's men from Knoxland Ridge to Herr Ridge, and finally to McPherson Ridge, where Buford intended to hold until the infantry arrived. At Willoughby's Run, in the valley between her and McPherson Ridges, the veteran Confederate infantry briefly halted and organized themselves before pressing onward up the slope against Buford's brigades under Colonels Gamble and Devon. Just in the nick of time for Buford's men, as the Confederates were gaining ground, Union 1st Corps infantry began arriving in the form of Cutler's brigade. This was a bit of a shock to the Confederates, but it marked a significant turning point in the morning's battle. The unexpected arrival of Union infantry changed the dynamics of the fight, and what started as a skirmish between cavalry and infantry was about to become a full-throated battle. From the west, Brigadier General Joseph Davis's brigade of Mississippi and North Carolina men rapidly approached Cutler's right two regiments north of the Chambersburg Pike, the 76th New York and the 56th Pennsylvania. The 56th Pennsylvania opened fire first with the command, "Ready, right oblique, aim, fire." The 2nd Mississippi and 55th North Carolina returned fire. Some of these shots raked the 76th New York as they got into position to the Pennsylvania men's right. At first, the 76th commander, Major Grover, didn't realize that these shots were from the enemy as he could not see any. He urged his men to hold their fire. Then a second volley came in, and still they withheld. Finally, the 2nd Mississippi came into sight, and Grover ordered his men to open fire. After about 30 minutes of fighting, 3 of Cutler's regiments, the 56th Pennsylvania and the 76th and 147th New York, withdrew to Oak Ridge, having lost half of their men. Davis's men pursued Cutler's shattered regiments to Oak Ridge. Cutler had left 2 regiments on the south side of the Chambersburg Pike at the McPherson Farm. They had skirmished with Archer's brigade as it approached from the west. Cutler's sister brigade, the Iron Brigade under Solomon Meredith, had arrived on the field and was pushing into McPherson's Woods, thereby freeing up Cutler's remaining 2 regiments, the 84th and 95th New York, to turn and face the threat posed by Davis's men. Acting Corps Commander Major General Abner Doubleday ordered the only reserve he had, the 6th Wisconsin, to leave its reserve position and go like hell towards Davis. Rufus Dawes, the 6th commander, put his men in line to the right of the 95th New York behind a fence on the Chambersburg Pike. Aiming into Davis's flank, the New York and Wisconsin men opened fire, halting Davis's pursuit of Cutler's brigade. Then suddenly, the Confederates appeared to vanish into the earth. They had taken refuge in an unfinished railroad cut that paralleled the Chambersburg Pike. What seemed a safe haven would prove to be a trap, and the Wisconsin and New York boys were ready to take advantage of it. Licensed Battlefield Guide, Larry Korchek.
This is what Lieutenant Harris of the 6th Wisconsin would write. Quote, "I could not help thinking how for once we'll have a square-up, knockdown fight, no trees, no walls to protect either, when presto, their whole line disappeared as if swallowed by the earth. But Rufus Dawes finds the major of the 95th and tells him, 'We must charge.' Dawes can see his men taking that heavy fire from the Confederate soldiers in the railroad cut, and they're getting cut to pieces. The New York units had aligned alongside, and the 3 regiments would charge upon the railroad cut. The Wisconsin line lurched forward toward the railroad cut, with Lieutenant Colonel Dawes shouting, "Forward, boys, forward, charge, a line on the colors, a line on the colors." The color bearer of the 6th Wisconsin, Sergeant Thomas Trempolo, and the regiment went into battle with just the national flag. As the Badgers moved forward, on the left of the line, Lieutenant Harris saw the flag stagger forward and knew that the order had been given to charge. Most of the men in Wisconsin did not know that the order had been given to charge with the noise and confusion of battle. Lieutenant Harris passed the stationary 95th New York, who also had not heard the order to charge. He ran over to the New Yorkers and shouted, "For God's sakes, why don't you move forward and join our left?" The 6th Wisconsin and the Brigade Guard would charge singly and alone. What the Brigade Guard is prior to the attack, you would take 20 men from each of the 5 regiments of the Iron Brigade, and they would form the Brigade Guard, but these men had been attached to the 6th Wisconsin, and what Dawes would do, he would take those 100 men, divide them into 2 companies, and place them on the flanks of his regiment. As the 6th Wisconsin lurched forward, the national flag went down several times, only to be picked up and shuddered forward. As the line traversed the field, the battered Wisconsin line was shaped in an inverted V. Dawes stated, quote, "With the colors at the point, moving hurriedly and firmly forward, while the whole field behind is streaming with men plunging in agony to the rear, or sinking in death to the ground." As the battle line approached within 30 yards of the railroad cut, a wall of flame and lead was delivered at point-blank range, which could not miss. In the smoke and noise, Lieutenant Colonel Fairchild recalled it seemed half of our men had fallen in the charge upon the cut. However, it took only a short time for the Wisconsin boys to reach the cut and the waiting Confederates down in the cut. But when it happened, the opposing lines crashed in a cacophony of noise, punctuated by a tangle of bayonets and musket butts. On the edge of the cut, the south side of the cut, fluttered a Confederate flag being carried by Corporal W.B. Murphy of the 2nd Mississippi. Murphy would live to report, "My color guards were all killed and wounded in less than 5 minutes. And also my colors were shot more than a dozen times, and the flagstaff was hit and splintered in 2 or 3 times. A group of Federal soldiers, quote, kept rushing for my flag, and there were over a dozen shot down like sheep in the mad rush for my colors." One such Wisconsin soldier was Private John Harland, who was shot as he moved toward the Confederate bag, his body sliding into the railroad cut at the foot of the soldier who had killed him. Private Levi Tongue aimed his musket point blank at the rebel. "Don't shoot! Don't kill me!" yelled the Johnny. Tongue would reply, "All hell can't save you now," and discharged his musket and knocked the rebel onto the body of his friend. Finally, Corporal Murphy related, "A large, burly man made a mad dash for my flag. As I tore the flag from the staff, he took hold of me and my color. The firing was still going on, was kept up for several minutes after the flag had been taken from me." The big burly man, Corporal Francis Waller of the 6th Wisconsin. Waller would state, quote, "Soon after I got the flag, there were men from all of the companies there. I did take the flag out of the color bearer's hands. I thought about moving to the rear with my trophy, but, quote, then I thought I would stay, and I threw the flag down on the ground, standing upon it, and loaded and fired twice. While standing on it, there was a soldier from the 14th Brooklyn who had taken hold of the flag and tried to drag it out from under me, and I had to threaten to shoot him before he would stop. By this time, though, we had cleaned out the Johnnies. He would earn the Medal of Honor for his actions on this day." Lieutenant Colonel Rufus Dawes reached the edge of the cut and called for the Confederates trapped inside to surrender. Dawes stated, quote, "I found myself face to face with hundreds of rebel soldiers who I looked down upon in the railroad cut, which was where I stood, 4 feet deep." He would shout, "Where is the colonel of this regiment?" Major Blair of the 2nd Mississippi replied, "Here I am. Who are you?" Here you have these two soldiers exchanging pleasantries as the battle is raging. Dawes, at this point, done something very unexpected. He jumps into the railroad cut, pushing aside armed rebel enemy soldiers as he made a path towards the major. Upon reaching him, he would say, "I command this regiment. Surrender or I will fire." Blair handed over his sword without a word. Dawes would later write, "The coolness, self-possession, and discipline which held back our men pouring in a general volley saved hundreds of enemy lives. And as my mind goes back to that fearful excitement, I marvel at it." However, Private Augustus Klein claimed every rebel soldier who, quote, "fired after we asked them to surrender got either a bullet put through his head or a bayonet through his breast. We didn't show any mercy." Dawes accepted Blair's sword and other blades offered by additional Southern officers. The fight in the railroad cut devastated General Joe Davis's brigade. The captured included 7 officers and 225 enlisted men, including Major Blair, and the regiment's torn and trampled flag. Of roughly 344 men in the ranks, the 6th Wisconsin lost 2 officers killed, 6 wounded, 27 enlisted men killed, 105 wounded, and 20 missing. The morning fight finally sputtered to a halt along the length of McPherson's Ridge. Dawes was trying to organize what was left of his command when Corporal Roller brought him the red flag of the 2nd Mississippi. Dawes passed the flag to Sergeant William Evans, who was shot through the upper legs and on his way to the rear using 2 muskets as crutches. Dawes wrapped the flag around his waist, tied it, and under his coat, urging him to keep it safe.
Meanwhile, left-wing commander Major General John F. Reynolds was personally feeding units of the Iron Brigade into McPherson's Woods, something a man in his position should not do. While doing this, a Confederate bullet struck him in the head. Within 30 minutes of being on the field, the man who was leading the Union effort that morning was dead. Licensed battlefield guide Jim Pangburn.
We're here on the first day's field in what's called the Herpst Woods, west of town. And this is where John Reynolds became the highest ranking officer killed in the Battle of Gettysburg. Reynolds is from nearby Lancaster, 52 miles east, 2 counties east of here. He's a West Point graduate. He is a professionally trained soldier, been in the Army, made it a career. He'd been captured early in the war and was exchanged or traded. And about a month before the battle in early June, he was summoned to Washington. And he's given an audience with the president and his cabinet, and they offer the command of the principal Union Army operating in the East, the Army of the Potomac, to Reynolds. And he's seen political interference in military matters up to this point, and he wants no part of it. So he asked the president and the cabinet, will I have a free hand in the way I operate this army, free from political interference? Well, Lincoln's response is, I'm responsible to the country. And so if I feel it's in the best interest of the country to intervene, I reserve that right. It's not what Reynolds wanted to hear. Said thanks, but no thanks. He turned the command down. And the reason I mention this is because he didn't have to be here at 10:45 on the morning of July 1st. Had he accepted that command, he would have been about 10 miles south of here in Maryland, bringing the bulk of the Union Army that did not fight here on day 1 into Pennsylvania. Instead, he's leading the vanguard. The enemy is on the soil of his native state of Pennsylvania, not only his native state, but the same region of the state that he's from, south central Pennsylvania, 2 counties east of here, Lancaster. So he arrives about 10:30, talks to General Buford in the cupola of the main classroom and dormitory building. Buford mentions that the Confederates are in the trees, there's the devil to pay. And Reynolds and Buford ride up here. Reynolds rides up to the edge of the woods where we're standing right now, the Herpst Woods. He's on horseback. Everybody can see him. He's aggressive. He's leading by example out in front of the men. Probably a little reckless, probably too far out in front of the men. But he is trying to lead by example. Everybody can see him. And he points directly into the woods, leading the Iron Brigade, the all-Western soldiers, some of the best troops in the Army of the Potomac, and says, "Forward, men, forward. Iron Brigade forward, into the woods and get those fellas." And at that moment, he turns in his saddle to look behind him, to urge men coming up behind him forward. When he turns to look behind him, he takes a bullet from the woods right behind his right ear. His aide, Charles Vail of Johnstown, Pennsylvania, said Reynolds was dead before he hit the ground when he fell out of the saddle. At age 42, he's the highest ranking officer killed in the Battle of Gettysburg. And today, he's the only soldier in the best marked battlefield in the world. 1,325 monuments, markers, and tablets, and another 400 cannon. He's the only soldier to have 4 monuments on the field. The death site marker where we're standing right now, an equestrian monument across the street, across from the McPherson Barn along Route 30, the Chambersburg Road. And then he's got 2 portrait statues. One inside the National Cemetery just off the Baltimore Street entrance that the people of Lancaster placed here in 1872, just 9 years after the battle. And then he's got a portrait statue on our Pennsylvania Memorial, the largest monument at Gettysburg. So very significant individual from nearby Lancaster, highest ranking officer, and the only soldier at the best marked battlefield in the world with 4 monuments.
The Iron Brigade pushed into McPherson's Woods. After a series of bloody fights, Archer's Confederates were repulsed. Archer himself became a Union prisoner. As Confederates reeled from their sudden repulse, a lull in the fighting followed as commanders decided what to do next, and reinforcements filtered in from directions north and south. Lee reached the battlefield around noon and gathered what information he could. Initially, he was hesitant to attack, but finally, he decided to capitalize on the actions of his subordinates and arriving reinforcements. Lee issued the order: attack. That is when, early in the afternoon, Lieutenant General Richard S. Ewell's 2nd Corps, coming in from the north, initiated an attack on the Union 1st Corps' right flank in a series of ill-coordinated assaults led by Division Commander Robert Rhodes. This attack, too, was repulsed.
As the 1st Corps was fighting on the fields west of Gettysburg, Major General Oliver Otis Howard and his 11th Corps were not far behind. By the time Howard arrived on the field, he discovered that he was the ranking officer and set out placing his men in the fields north of town. Recognizing the importance of Cemetery Hill, Howard left 1 division there as a reserve. Licensed battlefield guide Charlie Fennell.
Howard's men are coming through town. That's the 11th Corps. And they arrive somewhere between 11:30 and 12:30, 1 o'clock as they come through. The first units to come through were with Schurtz's division. They were von Amsberg's brigade. It was the 45th New York. And they're going to actually stop the attack of O'Neill on the 1st Corps' flank. It's interesting to note that the 1st Corps guys never talk about O'Neill at all, very little, but they definitely talk about Iverson. Okay, and that's because O'Neill didn't get that far because the 11th Corps stopped him. And then that was the infantry of von Amsberg plus Dilger's battery, all right there. So they formed a line. Howard was supposed to put his men on Oak Hill. Doubleday expressed interest in that hill when Howard came out to talk to him after the death of Reynolds, and they asked him how his line was, and Doubleday said, well, I got a great line unless they take that hill to the north, and that's Oak Hill. And Howard said to him, well, my men are coming up, we'll anchor the line there. So the Union line was supposed to extend from the Fairfield Road along McPherson's ridges out across the fields of the Forney Farm and anchored on Oak Hill. Didn't happen because Rhodes got there ahead of them. And so now they're forced to form in ground that is less than acceptable. Okay, it's open ground, there's very little cover, and there's one little bit of high ground called Barlow's Knoll. And Barlow sees it and advances his line to that position. Why? Well, it's high ground, and there were Confederate skirmishers there, and so he decided to maybe take it. If for no other reason, they were on the high ground at Chancellorsville and gave it up to the Confederates and got pounded. All right, so he moves forward. I also think Barlow, being somewhat aggressive, is thinking he can flank Dole's Georgia Brigade, which is down on the left flank of Rhodes. They're the only ones really in the valley there along the Carlisle Road there, and that's where they are. And I think if he thought he could flank them and roll up the line, they still might be able to get to Oak Hill. So this is how I kind of give Barlow a little bit of credit for being somewhat, intelligent, if you will. Certainly his move to Barlow's Knoll proves to be an eventual disaster, because, as I always tell people, Jube early arrives late, and it made all the difference. About 3 o'clock or so, here comes old Jube coming down the Harrisburg Road, and if you get out there and you look and you stand at Barlow's Knoll and you look at the Harrisburg Road, it's on your flank. It gives direct access to the rear. And so once Early deploys his men, and that would be Gordon and Hayes and Avery in that order. Extra Billy, who he doesn't like, he told him, you go watch Walmart and make sure they don't come from there. So he's providing rear flank security. And once they start to roll, they're going to hit the Union line at its most vulnerable spot. Now, in the meantime, Barlow realizes he's stuck out here like a thumb. The Confederates are lines much longer. They're more numerous than he is. Remember, the 11th Corps hasn't recovered from the casualties of Chancellorsville yet. They haven't had a chance there, so they're down significantly in numbers. And he went to Schurz, who went to Howard, and Howard's reluctant. He was at Chancellorsville too, right. And he's holding von Steinwehr back as an eventual reserve because, he's wedded to Cemetery Hill. He's the only one that noticed it was key ground, right? Everybody went by it, knew it was key ground, and he gets credit for it because he mentioned it in his report. But anyhow, Howard will do the worst thing, and chances are that's what he does. Okay, instead of sending the whole division early, he sends one brigade too late. He sends too little, too late. By the time the Coster's men are advancing, Barlow's position is becoming compromised.
Licensed Battlefield Guide Jim Pangburn.
About the same time the Union left is overlapped west of town, and you have these Union soldiers retreating into the town from both west and north, as many as 4,000 captured in the streets of town.
As the battle raged north and west of town, terrified civilians in Gettysburg managed the situation as best they could. Licensed Town Guide Brad Gottfried.
Mary McCallister is, I don't want to call her a spinster, but she's never been married. She's about 40, 41 years old, lives with her sister and brother-in-law on Chambersburg Street, right across the street from the Christ Lutheran Church. And she sees all these young men, before the lines have broken, she sees all these young men walking up Chambersburg Street and walking up, those steep steps going up to the church. And she says, I think I want to help them. And so she'll go in. But what happens, though, is after the lines break, she is going to see hundreds and thousands of young men in blue coming through Chambersburg Street, desperate to get away. And she is, she thought it was really neat. I'm going to go into the church. I'm going to help these young men like there's no blood, like there's no agony. I'm just going to sort of help them, And you open a door of a Civil War hospital. Oh, my God. Nobody, and I tell this to people, nobody can ever understand how horrible a Civil War hospital was. And she almost immediately is going to have trepidation about what the heck was I thinking? And she's going to stay there, but and she tells them, I want to leave. And they're saying, the surgeons and wounded men, don't leave because there are rebels coming into the town. We don't know what they're going to do to you. And so she has this dilemma. I can't stay here. The horror of all of this is killing me. And I want to go home. But they're telling me if I go home, who knows what they're going to do to me. And so she's going to stay until a shell hits the roof and that was probably a Confederate shell, hits the roof of the church. And I can't even imagine the impact, not only of to the building, but also these wounded men who are in shock anyway, screaming and yelling and crying because they don't know what's happening. And she just loses it. She's leaving. And for her to try to get home is quite difficult because she can't get across the street. there's such a mob of Union soldiers coming down the street that she has to go literally a half a block up on July 1 to get over, come around, and that's when the horror really starts to hit her, because she finally makes her way to her sister's house where she lives, and the door is open. The door is never open. And there's blood on the stoop. And she says, the rebels must have gotten into the house and killed my sister, my brother-in-law. Well, brother-in-law was gone, but the children. And she goes in with a lot of trepidation and realizes a number of Union soldiers have gotten in there. So what you find on July 1 is obviously terror on the part of civilians, but for many of these women, I don't know if you want to call it the maternal instinct or what is it, patriotism. You don't find this in the men, by the way. I don't know. There are not too many stories of men going into these hospitals, but women, and this transition from being, a civilian, a state existence, to all hell breaking loose. And on July 1, making that decision, I need to go into the hospital. I need to help these young men. They don't go in and say, yeah, here I am. This is great. I'm going to help. It's always, I can't stay. I can't. My nervous system is not structured in a way to live through the horrors of this. I got to get out of here. And what really, really energizes and surprises me is that they all returned. They all came back in. They all helped. I would leave. I would go home. I would say, I tried. I couldn't do it.
And Coster gets overrun. They're at the brickyard fight, okay? Though I don't think they were in the bricks. They were along a fence. And if you stand there at the mural, and you should if you haven't, and you turn around and you look the way they're looking, and what you're doing is you're looking uphill. They should have been up there. They should have been one road further up. Because they're on low ground and they can't see the enemy coming. Then they're hit by Avery and part of Hayes, and they just crushed them. So they joined the retreat back through the town. So this encourages Lee, I think, in the sense that you now have a victory over 2 Union Corps. You shot them up pretty good. And we can tell who the Corps are because they wear little symbols on their hats. And Lee can see circles and he can see crescent moons, and he too likes Lucky Charms cereal. He knows about these little charms. And so there's 2 of the 7 infantry corps that we've pretty much bloodied. Now he doesn't realize that his own men were pretty bloody too at this point. But like I said, he came here to win the war. And once you establish dominance over someone, you don't want to give them any reason to believe that they can beat you, especially an opponent who has more resources. And that's what Lee's doing with every victory he's won. He's undermining the will of the North to fight a war. He's paying an alarming cost for it.
But those who escaped the southern edge of town got back onto Cemetery Hill, found 4,000 fresh troops and 43 friendly cannons waiting for them. And the Union Army was able to rally there. Had there not been that reserve there that Howard left earlier that day, these guys probably would have had to head all the way back to Maryland, to Pipe Creek, the defensive position that Meade had already established south of the Mason-Dixon line. The fact that Howard left a reserve on Cemetery Hill proves that he saw that as a great place to fall back to long before he had to. And then really that becomes the turning point of the battle.
So the first day is a great Confederate victory. And I think it established in Lee's mind that we can do this. We can win this battle here, and if we do, peace with honor. And the South can't impact the means of the North to fight a war, but they can undermine their will to use it. And that will is waning in 1863. I don't care what happens at Vicksburg. I don't care. New Orleans has already fallen. Memphis has already fallen. Nashville's already fallen. Those are all very important cities. The top 3 of the top 5 cities in Confederacy are already held by the Union, and yet the South is still winning in the minds of people in the North and people in Europe. Why? Because you can't beat Lee. You can't beat Lee, you can't win the war. So I asked people, I said, when's the war over? I said, it's over when Lee says it is, and not a minute before. I don't care what anybody else says. As long as Lee and his army's in the field, Southerners believe they have a chance for success. So that's the key to understanding this battle and Lee's mentality.
When Union Army Commander George Meade learned of General Reynolds' death. He dispatched Major General Winfield Scott Hancock, made commander of the 2nd Corps after the Battle of Chancellorsville, to ride to Gettysburg and act in his stead.
Meade is talking to Hancock down in Tawnytown and saying, listen, I'm going to send you up there. You go up there and take a look at the ground, and you decide whether it's good enough to fight. And Hancock comes up here at the lowest moment for the Union Army, streaming through the town, the ones trying to get back into disorder, and he says, yeah, this place, you guys over here on this side of the road, you guys over here on this side of the water, we're going to make a stand here. And I think Howard should get the credit for choosing it because he left that reserve there early in the day, and that proves that he understood the value of Cemetery Hill. So Hancock should get credit, I think, in my opinion, for, because Meade gave him the authority to rank Howard, even though Howard was his senior, because Hancock knew when he came up here what Meade wanted. And so he looked at the situation like, yeah, this is just, Reynolds is right, this is the place to fight the battle.
Hancock and Howard began organizing defenses. The tired and sweat-soaked men rallied and built fortifications, bracing themselves for the attack they were sure would follow. A wooded prominence to the right of Cemetery Hill caught Hancock's eye, compelling him to send the newly arrived regiment from Cutler's Brigade, the 7th Indiana, to occupy it.
Winfield Scott Hancock, the superb 2nd Corps commander who had been sent by General Meade to assess the situation due to the death of John Reynolds, started to rally the broken units as they were coming through the town, and he sat there and he noticed that the hill was a pretty good position unless it was turned. And this is something he sent to Meade, and so he is, for lack of a better person to blame, the architect of the fishhook. So he started looking around and he saw a hill over here where we're standing, Culp's Hill, which was slightly higher than Cemetery Hill, and so he ordered Wadsworth to take men and put them on this hill. Now Wadsworth's division was pretty much shattered on the first day. They were shot to pieces, except for one unit, the 7th Indiana, which had the, I guess, the good luck to be guarding wagons under Colonel Glover, and Glover got tired of guarding wagons and brought his men here on his own authority. And so as they're coming up on the hill, Wadsworth Division is mostly between the top of Culp's Hill, the summit, if you will, where the tower stands, and Cemetery Hill. The 7th Indiana was sent pretty much on our side. We're on the eastern, southeastern side of the hill, and they formed somewhat of a skirmish line there to just, early warning system, tripwire, if you will, in case the Confederates come swinging around. In the meantime, of course, Lee is looking at the situation. He's in a battle. He doesn't want to fight, but he's winning. How mad can you be? And so he starts sending recommendations. You wouldn't call them orders because Lee doesn't know the situation. And even if he did, he generally allows his subordinates to make decisions. And he sent to Ewell, and I guess a synopsis or a summary of the orders or suggestions he sent to Ewell was, if take that hill if practicable, but don't bring on a general engagement until the rest of the divisions of the Army are here. And the hill he was pointing to was Cemetery Hill. Okay, now we know the Union forces are retreating back on Cemetery Hill. Hancock's got them behind Farmer's Stone Wall. The hill's already bristling with artillery from the 11th and the 1st Corps. So if you want to take that hill, you're going to have to fight for it. And that's not what Lee indicated he wanted. And so as Ewell and some of his other officers, including Jubal Early, who always seems to be where the decisions are being made, he says, well, look at that other hill, and he pointed to Culp's Hill. It dominates Cemetery Hill there, and if we take that, then we can force them off of Cemetery Hill without having to fight for it. It doesn't look like there's anybody up there. Well, how can you tell? It's wooded, And so they sent a recon up. Jubal Early's nephew and another officer came up, and they rode up on the hill and didn't see anybody on the hill. Now, there is a possibility that they conducted this before Wadsworth's division was deployed on this hill. So it's possible. I can't understand how all these Confederates, given these recon missions, can't find Yankees. They're all over the place. All right, there's like over 90,000 of them in the area, but they can't find them. And so they go back and pretty much say the hill's not occupied. And so Ewell looks at that situation, and at that point, of course, he's told by some of his subordinates, Extra Billy Smith in particular, that the enemy is behind him. Okay, they're coming down the York Pike, and the York Pike will give them access to the rear of the whole Confederate Army. Now, we don't have Jeb Stewart here, and even if Jackson's here, I think he would be still prone to check it out, because this is a formula for disaster if it's true. And so this took the focus off of Culp's Hill and Cemetery Hill, at least as far as Ewell's men are concerned. Rhodes was there, Early's there. These are two of the best combat officers in the Confederate armies, two of the most aggressive officers in the Confederate Army, and Ewell was too until he got married. That is a life-altering situation. Okay, so anyway, Jubal Early says, I don't give the report much credence, considering the source, but we should check it out. And so they go out there and there's nobody there. Okay, what they were looking for and what was there earlier was Williams' division of the 12th Corps. He had come up past the Outlet Mall on 97 and turned right on Clap-Sattler Road where the Sunoco station is, and went out that road, and that road gave him access to the Hanover Road, which is 116, and he cut across Hanover Road. He even had artillery deployed in advanced skirmishers when he found out from Slocum that the Union line wasn't at Barlow's Knoll anymore. It's back at Cemetery Hill, and you guys are kind of stuck out here on your own. You better come back. And so they turned around and marched back to the Baltimore Pike, and it was in that marching back that Early and Ewell went out to look. And Early said, you see those cows down there, Extra Billy probably thought they were cavalry, and those bushes along the fence line probably infantry. He doesn't have much respect for Extra Billy Smith, which is mutual. Billy doesn't have much respect for Early either. But be that as it may, there was a real threat for a moment. This was discovered in the 1950s when a man by the name of Coddington came here and got a local guide, and they went over and they looked at the records and followed the roads, and sure enough, it happened. Up to that time, it was sort of like a myth of the battle, or was sort of poo-pooed as non-essential information. Okay, but I believe it is essential because it took Ewell's focus off of Cemetery Hill and Culp's Hill. So when they come back, of course, your Early's division and Rhodes' division all tangled up in the town. You don't go into town on 4th of July. It's too crowded there, so you stay out of town. But they didn't know that. They're chasing Yankees into the town. They got stuck in town. So Ewell's standing there waiting for Johnson's division to come up, which is in that traffic jam out on Route 30. Johnson will eventually get off the road, which is a good idea, and gets into the railroad cut. And he comes in the railroad cut, which avoids Route 30 traffic. And when he gets here, of course, a long story short, he sent a recon up on the hill from Jones' division, or Jones' brigade, Johnson's division, and they come up here and look around, and they run into elements of the 7th Indiana. Okay, it's dark now. It's after 8 o'clock. It's always dark in the woods, and they go back and tell them the hill is occupied. So if there was a chance to take the hill, it passed. Now, Ewell gets a lot of criticism for this. Jackson would have taken the hill. Jackson would have taken Pittsburgh. Okay, that's the thing about Jackson. He just goes. All right, and so Ewell, after the war, because of the criticism on what he did on July 1st, wrote to Meade and asked him what he would have done if we'd occupied Culp's Hill on the evening of the 1st. And Meade wrote back, he said, I'd been forced to retreat. Okay, so if that means you win the battle or not, those are Meade's words, not mine.
One question that plagued Robert E. Lee was, where is General Stewart? Jeb Stewart, Lee's cavalry commander, had ridden around the Union Army, acting on orders from Lee, but managed to cut himself off from communications with Lee. Lee did have cavalry at his disposal. His need, however, was not for cavalry units, but for Jeb Stewart's ability to analyze military intelligence. Licensed Battlefield Guide, Rob Abbott.
Now, people think cavalry are all sexy swords and big cavalry charges, but cavalry's job is to collect intelligence. I actually had the unique opportunity to go to the Army Cavalry School, believe it or not. I was an armored car guy in the Marine Corps, and I got sent to cavalry school. The Army treated me like I was a foreigner. They spoke slowly and assigned me a sponsor. And And at cavalry school, they teach you the job of cavalry is to collect intelligence, and they literally teach you that you can't scout if you're dead, which wasn't lost on me. And the joke during the Civil War is you never see a dead cavalryman. So, because cavalry get killed, but they get killed way out there where nobody sees it happen. And a good cavalryman, his job is to gain and maintain contact with the enemy. You got to find him, and you got to stick to him, so that way you know where the enemy is. And that sounds kind of easy, but you're actually getting your face sanded 24 hours a day, because when you're maintaining contact, you're getting shot at. So, and the only time cavalry are supposed to fight is they fight the other guy's cavalry. It's what today we would call the counter-reconnaissance battle, where I want to see your stuff and you want to see my stuff. So we're going to fight so that I can see your stuff and you can't see my stuff. This is the only time cavalry are supposed to fight. What Buford does here on the first day is completely out of character for what cavalrymen are supposed to do. The Jones Brigade tablet, and I'm not talking Hillary Jones, and I'm not talking Rum Jones, I'm talking William Edmondson Jones, the cavalryman. His tablet is on the west end of Reynolds Avenue, just as you turn off a Fairfield Road onto Reynolds Avenue, right there. That's the Jones tablet, because they've got 3 tablets there. You got Jones, you got Robertson, and you got Imboden. And these are cavalry guys that are not on the main battlefield at Gettysburg. So they get tablets, but it's on the far end, and it's kind of close to where they, I guess as close as you're going to get on the military property, on the National Military Park property. So what's the deal with Jones? Well, first of all, Jones hates Stewart. Hates, like foaming, hates Stewart. And Stewart, in turn, hates Jones. So the first thing Stewart's going to do is going to be to strip cavalry away from Jones. So he's going to take, first thing he does is he takes the 35th Virginia, Elijah White, he's going to take him away from Jones and give him to 2nd Corps. That's the Comanches. That's the guys that hit the 26th Emergency Militia on 26 June. What are they doing on the 1st of July? They're basically covering Gordon's left as he comes down from Wrightsville. Okay, and then he's out protecting the Confederate left until Stewart shows up. Okay, but the bottom line is Robertson doesn't have access to him anymore. And then Stewart is going to pull the 12th Virginia Cavalry away from Jones. Why? Because Stewart hates Jones, and no glory for you. So we're gonna pare you down and take your assets away from you, so that way you're less capable. Okay, I guess this is the way people think. Okay, so Jones has five cavalry regiments and an artillery battalion, or a battalion artillery battery, Preston Chew's battery, but he's going to lose 2 of them. Okay, and Stewart is going to put Jones far to the southwest, and he's covering the rear of the Confederate Army. He's basically covering the mountain passes. And Jones is junior in grade to a guy named Beverly Robertson, and who really isn't that good, apparently, of a cavalryman. He gets kind of exiled early in the war back to North Carolina to recruit cavalry, although Robertson is a Virginian. And so because Jones is junior to Robertson, I got an excellent cavalryman working for a mediocre cavalryman, and they're far to the southwest. No glory for you, okay? I get all the glory, no glory for you. You're off to the southwest. So he's basically guarding the back door. And, initially Pickett is held up back there guarding the back door, but when Pickett comes forward, now it's all Grumble Jones.
The first day bore witness to some of the bloodiest fighting in the American Civil War, with a combined total of 16,000 killed, wounded, and captured. It was a stunning tactical success for Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia, leaving 2 Union corps driven from their positions and wrecked to a fraction of what they once were. Still, the price had been high for the Confederates. The 26th North Carolina of Pettigrew's brigade entered the battle with over 800 men. By the end of the battle, they will have lost over 500, with most of them sustained in the fighting on July 1st. Seeing the Union forces streaming back to Cemetery Hill, Lee made a fateful decision. Pointing in the direction of the Army of the Potomac, Lee turned to his old war horse, Lieutenant General James Longstreet, and said, "If he is there in the morning, I will attack him." The attitude behind these words would lead to the bloodiest battle of the American Civil War. Battle of Gettysburg 161st Anniversary Special, July 1st, 1863. Featuring licensed battlefield guides Larry Korchek, Jim Pangburn, Charlie Fennell, and Rob Abbott. Licensed town guide Brad Gottfried. Summary written by Michael 6 Questions Lentz. Script written by Matt Callery. Narration, direction, and editing by Matt Callery. Some sound effects provided by Quantum Era. Other sound effects synthesized, found in the public domain, or recorded by Matt Callery or Ty DeWitt. Music licensed through epidemicsound.com. Copyright 2024, Addressing Gettysburg, LLC, all rights reserved.